In the DAW with Modestep. And once again, for a whole bunch of complicated logistical reasons, couldn't be there in person, but that's okay. This time, Wyatt was helped by Sawyer. This one's a banger. Let's go in the DAW.
How was it recording the video on a net, knowing that if it broke, you were gonna fall to your death?
Pat agreed to this without telling me that he was terrified of heights. So he was like, yeah, I'll do that. I don't care. I'll do that. I'll do it.
But no, I felt better about the insurance on our lives. At least if we died, someone related to us would have been rich. There was that.
There was that.
Minor consolation.
We were ready to go on. We were excited.
Worst case scenario, that's a rad way to go out.
Right, it is. That's what I said to everyone. I mean, it was like the Grand Canyon. It was that big.
First real question, love the vocals. The processing on it is amazing. Let's look at the processing that you do on your vocals. How does that look?
Ooh, I don't know if I've done any of the processing in this project. So what I usually do all my processing in Logic first. So I tend to do like a big comp because it has that amazing swipe comp thing in there.
Basically what he's talking about is vocal comping is basically if you have 3 takes and you like the beginning of the first one, the middle of the second one, and the end of the third one, you can go in, chop out everything and basically make a Frankenstein version.
And do 100 odd takes of everything, go in, make everything meticulous with the fades. For a chain, to be honest, my chain isn't too complicated. We've got like really good microphones and preamps here. We run it through, the microphone I used for that one was the Aston Spirit running into a Neve 1073 and being parallel compressed by a SSL G-Bus compressor. So like even just going into the DAW, like it's already sounding good.
Okay.
I just used like basic Logic stuff, I think. I don't think it was anything special, just a bit of compression and a bit of EQ, which you'll find like throughout this whole thing. I'm not a guy who uses a million different plugins, and I tend to try and stick with stock stuff where I possibly can and just try and make it sound as good as possible using what's in the box.
So you have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment, but already making your voice sound premium already. So that makes sense. You know, once you put into the DAW, you don't really need to do the virtual companions.
And like we used to do it a fair bit. And I think back in the day I was using the Waves Maserati VX1 plugin. That plugin's got some magic. I don't know what it does. It's one of those like one knob for everything. It might just be my voice as well. I know that like I tested my voice with a whole bunch of microphones. I've got a Telefunken AK-47. At one point we had a Neumann UAE, whatever it is. Sometimes one microphone just sounds perfect for your voice. So I think like all of this setup is like 10 years of trying a whole bunch of different setups, and this is the one that works for me.
Your guys' drums sound phenomenal to go along with the track as well. And coming from doing my research, coming from a previous kind of electronic rock band, how did taking drums from that genre into D&B and dubstep, do you guys do live recording for your drums, or are you now working solely in your DAW for your drum patterns?
So what we do is we've had to develop a pretty unique way of doing it, because originally we did just use drum recordings and it was terrible. And like we didn't really know too much about dubstep or drum and bass and how people process their drums and how they got to where they sounded. Through just a matter of eliminating everything else, we ended up making him a drum kit, Pat's drum kit, where it was the kick and the snare were trigger pads, so they're muted trigger pads. So we were only taking the cymbals, hi-hat cymbals, and toms, and a little bit of live snare. But that live snare won't be used for like the punchy main.
All for the offbeats, like all the ghost notes and the one EN and the 2 EN and the 3 EN. Never like beat on. The beat on would be like the 1, 2, 3, 4.
That's always on the sample pad. Yeah. So we have like the like heavy kick and snare.
Like quite a live dynamic in between those beats, just so like people know that there's swing in between that time, and more importantly that it isn't mimed. I think because like too many people can just set it up and you know go with the roots or with the sort of with the pulse of the song.
So you put like a trigger on each drum, And when you hit that drum, it sends a MIDI trigger of that drum off to what we would be doing is triggering a gate with it. We'd be able to like change the attack and release of a real live drum based on the MIDI information that we're getting. So you don't use the MIDI information for any sound purposes. You just use it to trigger envelopes and things like that.
Cole, who's the other intern who couldn't make it today, he has a question about your sound design on the main big bass sound that you have during the drop.
It's a whole lot of sounds here.
That's
so the main impact sound.
Yeah, let's check it out. So you got 4 different chains right now.
So it's like a composite of a bunch of different sounds. And I got this kind of idea from Culprit, who I've worked with a bunch of times. And on our last record, he came over to my house and lived with us for like, I think it was about 6 or 7 weeks, and taught me infinite amounts of wisdom. And this was one thing that I got from him, was like, once you've made one strong sound, which was like my main sound there, is to use variations of that sound to create things for the sides. The main power comes from this sound. It's so basic. It's not even like a complicated patch at all. Wavetable position being automated. I think that might even just be it. And then a bunch of effects here. Yeah, some stuff on the EQ to act as kind of a filter. And like a fast LFO thing to create a kind of wobble sound within there as well. And that's just doing like some compression gain and mainly kind of affecting this one here, which sounds like crap by itself, but
just so that I understand, so the viewers understand. So what you're saying is that Culprit taught you this, and what he taught you is that you make a sound, but you put that sound in an instrument Mac, you duplicate the chain of it, and you start making variations to fill up the sides.
Yeah, and I don't know whether that's even what he meant, to be honest, but that's kind of what I got from it's just like layering the sound so that like the power comes from the center. And you try and keep the power to be as mono as possible, because a lot of sound systems, like that's where your power comes from, you know, it's the mono, the center of your sound. And then so that it doesn't just sound empty and down the center, is then kind of edit the patch to just kind of involve some more side information. You kind of do, and you don't really think, why am I doing this? I just tweaked and tweaked and tweaked until it sounded good.
With each one of these patches, do you process each one of the instances and then process them as a whole, or do you just process them as a whole?
I mean, there's very little processing, and it just looks like saturation and EQ, to be honest. What I'll do is I'll make like the main sound, copy it a bunch of times, and then change something about it, whether it's like the shape of the envelope or the LFO speed or who knows, whatever, just to give it some different movement. Yeah, so like you can see here, I've got a whole bunch of copies of the same sound. I mean, that's not exactly the same, but probably, yeah. So it's based off the same patch, but just slightly modified. You get your main tone from like your what I would call like your bass patch. Off that bass patch, copy it and copy it and copy it, and then just kind of mutate it to create the different sounds. Picture in my mind for it to be like a mouth sound of some description. So I'm always sitting there going, oh, I want to go wow, and then like try and recreate that in my head. How do I filter it to make it kind of do that, basically, imitate what my mouth is doing?
Are you guys more methodical in developing these sounds and melodies, or do you kind of go how you're feeling that day? And for instance, took the Deadmau5 masterclass, and he stated he has no emotion in his tracks. Everything just starts by plugging in MIDI notes and just going from there. So do you guys take that approach, or when you sit down to work, do you have some kind of motivation or emotion that really helps drive your tracks?
Yeah, so I'd say we're kind of the opposite of how Deadmau5 works. We're actually like songwriters first. So this song has been a song for about 2.5 years. Wow. Without any production to it. So we had the a cappella. I just basically try and write songs all the time, vocal, piano. It would have been like a cappella first, and I probably would have written it to something that just like went. And then we would have kind of like created a structure for the song and then bounced out the a cappella once it was done. And then kind of from there, juggle ideas around. And we had so many different versions of this song. And we just kept reproducing it until something sounded right.
It's a song about like, it's obviously personal to Josh. So it's like, I think when he'd written the song, going through different production ideas, there was like, you know, it had to fit the vibe that was right for the emotions that are in the lyrics. And I suppose, you know, if Deadmau5 says that there's no emotion in his songs, that's cool. But I think that might be the case in some of the music for our songs. But when it comes to lyrics, it's impossible, I think, for the way that we structure songs to not have some, you know, some feeling, some like emotion that's going somewhere. And yeah, there's usually movement tracks and vocals. So yeah,
we wanted the drop to kind of have this throwback feel. And when we were doing like a few different versions of it, there was like, oh, should we go a bit rhythmy with it? Should we go a bit more aggressive with it? Should we make it more modern? And they were like, no, let's make it sound like a modern version of 2010. And in order to get there, we had like a really rough, terrible version of it, the really basic versions of the sounds. So like do a super rough version of it, and then I spent easily 2 weeks just staring at my screen, tweaking away, and trying to make them sound, I guess, slightly more modern, slightly more powerful. For this song anyway, is the way that we work, but it can be different for every song that we do, depending on the approach that we want to take. There's no real like formula. Whatever inspires you at that time, whether it's, like I say, like a melody or an a cappella that we're bringing, then we'll produce around it. But sometimes we'll produce a song and then we're like, right, now we need to write a top line for it. It can go either way. But what we're trying to do at the moment more than anything is trying to write songs first and then produce around them. Because I just find that you get like a song that is tailor-made to the words you're singing and tailor-made to the vibe of the tune. It's much harder to write a good song than it is to produce a good tune, in my opinion.
Much harder to write a timeless song when production is at the forefront and not songwriting.
Yeah, and there's so many talented kid producers out there. Like I watched some of your guys, the Owl 5 one.
Here's the sound without that, and here's the sound with woman chipping. It adds like a whole nother dimension to it.
He's just like some super technical genius guy, and there are kids out there who are just getting better and better at that kind of thing. So what we try to bring to the table is the traditional songwriter side of things that I feel is missed a little bit in like modern EDM
in the
stuff.
Scene, yeah.
I noticed I never had to try to listen to your vocals. They were just always there. They were ever present. They're beautiful. They're up front. Even when there was instruments going on, you know, sounds going on, all that kind of stuff, they never got lost. How do you make sure that that happens? I feel like that is something that I and the entire producer community struggles with, is like, how do I keep my vocals here without getting smothered by the other stuff?
The way I do it is good leveling, I guess, at a mix stage. Two ways that I would do it is, making sure that when you mix, when your final mix down is being done, give yourself headroom to be able to like turn up the vocal. Don't be struggling. I know a lot of people, like, as they're producing, they mix as they go, and then they're like smashing into plus 10B into a limiter, and you're obviously going to lose headroom that way. So when we try and do a final mix down, we try and make sure that nothing is even tickling zero. All of the frequencies are really, really level. And again, this is another thing that Culprit showed me, was just make sure everything has its space in the mix. Nothing is like getting in the way of something else, and make room for things. So I'll go in and make sure that like I dip out anything that's using the same frequencies as the voice. I try and dip out like just the mid on the mid side, try and just take down the center, just to create room for it. But as well as that, I think also the performance is important, using good microphones, using good compression, and multi-tracking. If you want them to come through in your mix, make sure you're like multi-tracking, doing doubles, panning some to the left, some to the right, and just making sure that there's like power in the vocal for it to actually power through anyway. If there's no power in the vocal, it's going to be much harder for the engineer to push it through. But if you make sure the take is good and the quality of equipment you're recording on is good, then it's much easier to make it sit nicely in a mix.
So how you're saying, like with some of the other instruments in the mix, you'll go in, you'll dip out the frequencies in the mono space for the vocal so that the vocal can pop out in those frequencies. Do you only do that in the parts of the songs where the vocal is present, or do you do it for that entire sound in the entire song?
I would try and do it for the entire sound, and if it's a sound that then is like not working well, then I would go back and see that is like an arrangement issue more than anything else. I wouldn't like to trick mix down like that, if you know what I mean, like cut it here and then when the vocal comes in it changes, because then your ears are going to hear it. It's going to be like a weird change when suddenly the vocal comes in, it's filling a space. It depends on the vocal, depends on what you're chaining it to. Seen some people side chain their vocal to some things, but I wouldn't ever mess with that. I think I'm a bit more of a classic engineer. I wouldn't do that kind of stuff.
When you guys were producing this, what was the absolute hardest thing about this track that you're just like, oh my gosh, like this almost makes it not worth it?
The thing I struggled with was kick and snares. Up until that, like literally like that point, I've always struggled with my kicks and snares. And then I just had to go and like learn a little bit more about what makes a good kick and snare. I ended up learning how to just, I think it's a noisier technique, or I don't know, probably loads of people do it, is I use like 3 snares, but not layered. I try and fade them into each other. So I take like the transient from one, the body from another, and then a tail from another, and just try and piece them together. That for me was like the hardest thing. Now that I've done a bunch of those, what I'll do is to prepare for a track is I'll go in and make a whole bunch of sounds before I even make the tune and bounce them to audio. I mean, I haven't done it on this tune, but a lot of the time. So if I go in here, I've got like... just literally tons and tons of bass hits, kick drums, and then I go into all of our old tunes, take all of the kicks from all of our old songs, and it's just useful to then have like really good kicks and snares. You know, I know these all sound good within a track space, so if I drag them in, one of them's going to work. And now it's got to the point where I don't really have to make more kicks and snares.
For you guys, what set this track apart from all the other ones?
For me, it was like bridging this kind of modern Serum era and the old kind of massive world, I guess you would call it. I don't know, like, yeah, just like 2010 versus what we hear now. I really tried to bridge not just like technically, but also the vibe of it. And I feel like this is the first tune that I've ever made that I was really happy that like I managed to, I feel like I ticked the boxes really nicely. And when we sent it off, I was like, I think we achieved exactly what we wanted to achieve. We wanted people to hear it, get a sense of nostalgia, which what you guys are saying, it might reminded you of kind of Sunlight and tunes back in those days.
Sunlight hurts my eyes. Sunlight hurts my eyes.
The fact we managed to do that, I was really happy with, and yeah, just like making it more modern, bringing it to that kind of Serum era and giving it a bit of a grit and growl that probably wouldn't have even been possible to have done back in 2010.
You're bridging the gap with this song in 2018, modern music production, and 2010, very early-ish production. So besides like like you mentioned, the difference between Massive and Serum, what are the other differences that you can see between 2010 production and now?
Well, for me, I know what I was doing. You know, that was a key part of it. Like, when we were mixing down Sunlight, I remember we had a studio, we just had some success basically with our first few songs. And I remember trying to mix down Sunlight. About a month of just kind of going into the studio. It was about 174 channels of audio, which should never have been that to begin with. Tweaking tiny things, but not really knowing what I was doing. And there was no side chaining on the whole thing. There was no stemming of the project. There was nothing. It was just like this giant mess project that I did not know where to even begin, like mixing anything down. And I actually, at the time, I remember giving it to a few engineers just to be like, do you think you can do it? But like, there was no engineers at that point who were really into electronic music. Like 2010, it was a few of us making dubstep. There was not a lot of us. And the people who had these techniques, they didn't want to tell anybody how they were doing it. It was secretive, very, very secretive at that point. So it was just down to me to get it sounding how I wanted to sound it. Kind of got there in the end. It's kind of weighty enough to play out, no definition in anything. So I think what the difference between this and that is just like knowing what I was doing. We had to play in our live show and the mix down just wasn't cutting it against all this new material. So Culprit, in fact, he took me to one side when we were doing a DJ show with him and was like, man, I'm gonna redo this tune for you, man.
Yeah, I was he's like, I'm gonna do you guys a gift, man. He's like, yo, take this VIP. And you know what, man? It's like the gospel according to Johnny Bashment, man. You can't even argue with what Culprit gives you.
I wasn't going to turn down a Culprit VIP of Sunlight. Yeah. Just knowledge is what we brought to the table. And I feel like if I had this knowledge back then, Sunlight probably would have sounded similar to this, but it's kind of good that it didn't, because it may not have hit in the way that it hit back then.
A lot of the things that anybody in the music production world learns from, especially, as you were saying, like you were some of the early beginners, what you guys learned from was, just hard knocks. You just tried crap, you see it, you see what happened. If you were lucky, you were able to speak with someone and they kind of between, tongue in cheek, they're like, oh, why don't you try this kind of, but don't tell anyone I told you that. That has faded away over the last couple of years. So where do you guys personally now learn your new stuff? Like, what is your resource to learn new techniques or to progress or what have you?
I'd love to say it was YouTube tutorials, but every time I watch a YouTube tutorial, and obviously no offense to this because this is a YouTube tutorial, but there is so little information on like these modern sounds that people are making, and you go onto a tutorial and it's like, yeah, I've made this sound and it's Fun Soundboy song. And he plays it and it sounds like, yeah, and that's great. I'm going to show you how to make it now. And I'm just like, not again. But yeah, there's a ton of that online, which for me has not been helpful at all. There's a few great resources. Seamless, is that the guy's name? Yeah, Seamless. One of those insane brains that can like reverse engineer every sound. But to be honest, my main learning resource has just been listening to music. That for me is the like critically listening to music. And any producer that says to me, you know, how can I progress my sound design or my mixing down? Just listen to like people who are really good at it, like Noisier, Culprit, Cohen Sound, like all the top dogs at the mix downs, and just kind of try and gauge what's going on. Try and use critical thinking and your own kind of intuition to try and work out what's going on, because these tutorials might show you how to do one tiny specific thing, but they're not going to show you the thought process that was behind it. You have to work that out for yourself, and I think that's like an important thing. Yeah, I'm sure there are loads of great courses out there to teach people this kind of thing. I think like natural intuition and actually wanting to learn it for yourself instead of just being spoon-fed a bunch of preset packs, which you can get now, loads of brilliant preset packs out there. You can just flick through all of those instead. But if you want to find out how those preset packs were made, you've got to work it out for yourself.
I want you guys to be brutal. Like, I want you to put on the brutal honesty top hat right now, and I need you to tell me 100%. I mean, what was your thoughts in the DAW? Do you feel like it's valuable, or do you feel like there's a lot of things that needs to change?
No, I think it's wicked. So like actually sitting down with people who do it and know how to make the sounds, that's great. And especially when you've got like hour-long to 2-hour-long things, it's like you can sit down and actually get the thought process behind how they've done it. And I'd say like there's a few masterclass tutorials that I'll watch from legit producers that are like hour to 2 hours. Those are going to give me way more information than any of these little "you want to kind of things.
Your guys' mix downs, you mentioned a little bit about that earlier and how far you've progressed from 2010 to now. I start my mix downs with a test oscillator doing pink noise, and that just kind of helps me start to get the levels in the ballpark on the same playing field. What's your method to doing mix downs? Because I know a lot of guys do their own mixing and mastering, and which I think is phenomenal. And as a producer, it's going to help everyone grow. So how do you guys start when you start your mixing process?
Okay, so this project that you're looking at now is what I call like my plugin project. So this will be as much as my computer can possibly take without it just being a pain to actually press play. And then when I get it to the point where I'm like kind of almost there and it's like ready for mix down, I then bounce out stems of the groups and I will load it into my final mix project. And this is basically audio versions of everything. And my mix process is kind of just leveling. I just kind of want everything that is going to be hitting 0, things like bass, to be kind of leveled at that, up to 0. So I kind of mix up to 0 dB all the time. Use a lot of ducking, so a lot of enveloping, frequency split enveloping. What I try and do with the stems is just get it so it's visually very easy to see the level of things. So as you can see here, you can tell that is definitely louder than that. I would go in and level it by eye. And a lot of the time I'm mixing down just using the spectral analyzer here, because I now just know from doing it so much what kind of frequencies I should be seeing on the spectral analyzer. But I try and keep the process as simple as possible. Make sure my kicks and snares are loud and clear and aren't over compressed. Yeah, so I use like volume shaper to trigger different envelopes, and we do that for our live show as well. So anything that Pat hits, we'll duck out anything else that's on stage. Pat pretty much is a metronome, to be honest. He's a robot. I'm very lucky to have a drummer who can grab a drumstick. In fact, you should just grab a drumstick in a moment and just show them. Like, we can put on a metronome at like 200 BPM, and with one hand, he can just be like,
and then slide it down to 4 BPM, and I will not miss. No, I'm joking. I can't keep time. I just do my best, man.
That's one of those drummers that is like timing first. Try and get the mono signal sounding strong. I then tend to, on the master, I'll throw on a plugin by Voxengo called MSED, which is just like a mid-side thing. And I'll just mute the mids, mute the sides, and I'll mix them separately. So try and get them leveled out and balanced so that the side mid is like nicely balanced and nothing's kind of interfering with itself. But yeah, you can see by like my mix down here is just such basic stuff, really, really basic stuff, just kind of notching out frequencies, very rarely add anything with EQ. EQ is always subtractive for me. Yeah, there's so little going on. I used to overcomplicate things, so it's just getting it very, very simple and making sure there's just room for everything. And then I tend to make sure everything's coming through at like -6 dB, and then I turn my compressor up by 6 dB and let the reductions happen. I try not to make my master limit by over about 3 or 4 dB at most. And yeah, a lot of the time I'm kind of checking out RMS, seeing how loud it actually is, and trying to sneak in a bit more sound to kind of improve the RMS and the overall loudness of the tune. But other than that, I don't think I do a whole lot. I think I try and keep it very, very simple. Oh, actually, okay, here's something I do. But I used to go in similar way to this, and I would chop every tiny bar of music and dip against something else that was going on, so that really there was only room for about 2 or 3 sounds at once. And then make sure that those 2 or 3 sounds, when they're mixed together, they're not clashing with each other. But yeah, other than that, it's just like basic sensical EQing and yeah, mixing, I guess.
You're the first person on here who actually has, a mixing board, a processing board right in front of them. So what a lot of people will do if they do have access to something like that is they'll go in, they're in the box, they're doing their thing, they're producing, yada, yada, yada. And then what they'll do is they'll get a mix down, bounce that mix down out, run it through their console, and then bring it back in. Do you do that?
No. And I have done a few times. I just don't see the point anymore. And I have a very expensive desk with very expensive channel strips. I've got 40 inputs here of super analog SSL, and the difference between putting it through here and just running it through Ableton, I can't hear it. Unless I was like trying to clip, and the one thing that this is good for is overdriving stuff, making it much louder without any clip distortion going on. But I just don't do that much, What I will do is, where this desk comes into handy, is recording drums, obviously sound brilliant coming into the desk. As far as like using it as a summing board, not a lot. And with this desk in particular, you can hit this button here and it turns the whole thing into a controller for Ableton. So I can actually just mix using this desk in Ableton. That's kind of nice as well. If you want to do like automation curves, actually having it under your hands to do stuff, quite nice. But that would be for more like traditional recording drums. If I get bands in here, which we do a lot of recording for other people as well, that'll be more kind of that side of the coin than the electronic stuff.
You just find yourself using more and more and more in the box and less and less and less out of the box. Is that what you're saying?
100%. Other than things like synthesizers, which obviously you can't fake. I mean, you can get close, but there's some things like a Prophet. You would never be able to get a plugin that sounded really like a Prophet or a Moog, however you want to say it.
You say that, but you probably will in a few years. It's all the box in the last 10 years has changed so much.
Yeah, it's good, and there are some modeled versions of them, but there's just something missing. And it's also the hands-on thing that like the controllers haven't got good enough yet to really, like when I'm making a sound on a synth, I'll stand there almost with my eyes closed and kind of just play with things until it sounds right. Whereas with software, you've got to sit clicking and with your eyes open and tapping away. But other than that, like I now pretty much produce 100% on this laptop. I've got it to the point here. So we've got one USB cable that then gives me 120 inputs and outputs through the SSL. So all I have to do is pop that in, and then that's like, it becomes part of this big studio without any loss of quality whatsoever.
What are your favorite remixes that you've heard of Hire so far?
So we did a remix competition for this tune, and we had 2,000 remixes of this song. We had to go through a lot of entries. In fact, we did it on stream, which like a lot of people don't do. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you can watch us listening to easily 500 of them. I think it's got to be at least that amount. Basically, the perfect remix for this song would be the remix that we got, and the one that won the competition joint with someone else was this kid called Oliver. He did everything that we wanted to hear from the remix, like that nostalgic 7th Apart 1P sound, the original kind of wow Rusko vibes, threw that in there, but also with modern twist, like kind of you could hear he'd made them in Serum. He just killed the remix, man. Everything that we wanted to get out of a remix, he did it.
Yeah, I think there was probably like 50 to 60 really good ones.
Yeah, it was really difficult to decide.
It got to the point where like me and Josh didn't agree on the best one, and nor did the label.
The Champion remix was also really good.
Really, really good. Yeah. So like those two instantly stood out to us as like 100% these have to come out. And there was another one as well, the Quiet remix was really, really good. And I kind of wish that had been on the EP, but Montscat thought that was too original. They were like, that's not...
Like, it's its own song with the higher vocal tuned over it.
Exactly.
We were like, yeah, kind of, but also, I don't know. I mean, I was speaking to the dude online, and he's like, he was super excited about that tune that he'd made. So I gave it
a repost the other day, so he's going to get a bunch of...
Yeah, he's a good producer anyway. He's on a crazy, like...
Dubstep.
So he's doing some, like, crazy guitar kind of, like, drops now. And,
so that remix, the Fear Face remix was awesome. But yeah, that Oliverse remix, it ticked all the boxes, man. He flipped that fully on its head and did everything that it needed to be, man. He had like things from like the piano stuff sounded like one of the Scream tunes back in the day.
I feel like he won the competition because he got the point of the original tune and added to it.
Yeah,
perfect. You know, he didn't try and reinvent the wheel, and adversely, he didn't try and do the song kind of in that same structure.
He tried to beat us at our own game.
Yeah, exactly that. He tried to do it classy, man, and that's why he won. So
he's insanely good producer.
He's a wild, out of control guy, man.
You know, if you woke up tomorrow, literally everyone forgot about this song, and you're like, sweet, let's re-release it. Is there anything that has bothered you so much that you want to go back and change it, or is there anything that you want to do differently?
Yeah, there is, and it's so small. I don't think anyone would even notice. Let me show you what it is.
All right.
And this was actually down to feedback from somebody else that I did it, but sometimes I take feedback on just to shut that person up, not because I actually agreed with them. And this was one of those cases. So on the first initial drop of higher, you will notice it's less powerful than the second time it drops, right? So with you. So that one versus this one. And I just wish that it was on both of them. That's literally it. That's the only thing I would change. It doesn't annoy me that much, but and it's so minor, I don't think many people would hear. But and I guess also I would like to kind of add. I would probably add like a piano outro that we did when we were on the net, when we were on that crazy space net thing in the mountains. We did like this piano outro for it, which was really, really nice. And I think that would actually be a nice way to finish the tune.
Awesome. You mentioned basically, you know, the problem, quote unquote, the problem, the thing that really bugged you about the song that you would like to go back is that basically is the dynamics, right? The second drop is basically louder than the first one, right?
Yeah, more aggressive.
Have you guys seen The Greatest Showman? Okay, guys, this is your homework.
I'm writing it down right now.
Go watch The Greatest Show. It is in theaters right now. It will literally change your entire life. Who plays Wolverine? What's his name? Hugh Jackman. It's a musical, but it's not a musical. You'll just go watch it.
95 people like this film.
95%.
Yeah.
It is a musical, but it's a musical with like a really, 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 really good story. That's why it gets you. And the music is probably like the highest quality music I've heard in a very, very long time. A lot with like theatrical stuff. A lot of things are very dynamic. That's sometimes you got to turn out the TV and turn on the TV. You got to move around the theater because it's just too loud in certain spots. What they did with that is they kept that very true with the music. It's very dynamic. Because they incorporated that, it was insane.
But I know what you're saying. It definitely like enhances the whole.
I agree.
You get into it, and actually, I used to go back and listen to old records. I had like some old Donny Hathaway vinyl, and like it was recorded in quadraphonic sound, and put that on, and it just sounds like you're in the room with those instruments.
Yeah.
You really don't get that with a whole lot of music these days. It just sounds like it's coming from a phone, a laptop, some speakers. It doesn't like create presence and space like it used to.
I wasn't trying to say, hey, apply the sound techniques and movies into your music, because obviously movies get away with more dynamically than we do in
different ball game
that we do.
Hey, dude, he's ragging on your mix.
I just want you to know, like, even if what you got right here, the first drop, maybe a little bit quieter, a little bit less aggressive than the second drop, I promise it's okay. It's actually nice because I
know it is, but most people only listen to the first drop. That's what was always going through my head. Only listen to the first drop. But either way, it doesn't annoy me to that level in any way. It's like it's pretty much neither here nor there. I would probably ever be able to notice the difference because I was the person doing it. But just one of those things, isn't it? You listen back and there's a little noise here, a little noise there. But now I try and be fairly meticulous and don't let something go until it's ready to go.
The final portion to this, well, usually there's more than us, but would you like my feedback on your song?
Yeah, go on.
I didn't want to say anything until you said it, but you said it perfectly. This was a 2018 version of a 2010 version. So you hit that right on. That was my first thoughts when I heard this. So sound design was amazing. Vocals were crisp. They were amazing. They were clear. That was absolutely like you guys did an incredible job. My feedback comes into the uniqueness of the sound design. Okay, so as you notice as watching in the DAW, that's what we're getting to the nerdy part here. We're getting into like let's learn some new techniques. Let's try something else. Get you excited to go back into the DAW. Let me ask you this: have you ever played around with a plugin called Synaptic Morph?
No.
Okay.
I will now.
So this is they took the theory of vocoding, right? So for those who don't know, a vocoder, to make a very crude definition of it, is basically combining two sounds, right? You have a modulator and you have a carrier. One takes on the sound of another. Basically, it sounds like you're combining them, right? Go listen to Jason Derulo's What You Say. It's on there. What they kind of took that idea, it's like, what if we can create something where you can combine two sounds, right? And it's really amazing. They do it with different algorithms than vocoding, and they actually you can switch through different algorithms inside of the plugin to try different like combinations of it. It's really beautiful. But here's the thing. Here's where it gets interesting. Go and grab all the songs you've ever made. Let's say you take this song, right? Let's say you take Higher, you bring it in, you put Morph on there, and then you take it, you make another track and you put Higher on there, but you reverse it. And then you combine them together through Morph to see what comes out. Just like weird things like that. And then vocode them together. And then, just like kind of like that. What I'm saying is take the material you already have, things that you already know are amazing, and see how creative you can be and create something better. Does that make sense?
This is where the VIP is going to happen now.
Yeah. My other thing, the same concept of going and using things that you've already have or made into making them into something new and amazing, right? Is how often do you use the Max for Live Convolution Reverb Pro?
Never.
Oh. Do you have Max for Live?
Yeah, I do, and the only reason I even installed it was for our live show to try and do some triggering stuff, but I don't really use it. No, I guess I don't use it.
For those who don't know what a convolution reverb is, basically you record an impulse of some sort, right? So like if you go into a room that's a little bit spacious, you record a clap, and basically you can drag that recording into the reverb, and the reverb will simulate that you're in that room. Whatever you put into the reverb will sound like you're in that room, basically, depending on how well the recording is. So what if we took Higher and used the entire song as an impulse, and then we put other songs into that reverb so it's going feeding in? Me and Crywolf did this the other day with my daughter's voice. We took a bunch of gibberish recording of her and threw it through one of his songs. It was beautiful.
Noisia did an interview recently in the studio, and that's all he went through was his techniques for using convolution reverb. So if you ever get a moment to watch it, it's on YouTube, and he does some crazy stuff.
Awesome.
Really good. So he even puts his drums through his bass sounds through his drums, and all kinds of madness to and like we'll go through his library of bass presets and then use that as the reverb in order. He just gets some bizarre sounds and some stuff that you wouldn't normally hear.
The other thing that I have for you, as long as we're riding this sound design train, sound design pony. What's amazing, recently I've made an instrument rack, shared it around with a few friends, and they think it's freaking insane. So what you do is you use common Ableton things, except you duplicate them 50 times, right? So what I did was I got a sound, let's say it's like a guitar or something, and then I put a simple delay on there, map the time and the feedback and the wet dry and whatever else you want to the macro in an instrument rack, and then you duplicate that simple delay 50 times, 100 times, 150 times, as many times as you want, right? And then you throw that on things and you just see what happens, dude. I'm telling you, Ableton's native plugins, whatever you want to call them, native effects, they don't shine until you bring them to their knees. When you bring them to their knees, that's when the coolest crap starts happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what you're laying them over themselves over and over and over and over.
And so you can go in, you can change them. So, okay, simple delay number 36, technically when I turn this knob, it doesn't turn the exact same way as simple delay number 37. You can go in and change all that kind of stuff, basically making a very complex comb filter. But I'm telling you, man, you try that with anything, all right? You with the freaking the grain delay, with the Yo-Man setting on, I think that whatever that's on, ring modulator, whatever. You just go and you just duplicate it many times as you want to. And that's when weird stuff starts happening, and then that's where the new unique sounds come from.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like you're touching on something here, because I very rarely just experiment. A lot of the time with sound design and with like production stuff, I know in my head what I want it to sound like before I make it. So I have like a goal. And this is what I say to Pat as well, is like, as a learning, like if you're learning to produce, I feel like you can experiment all day long and you will get some mad stuff. But like, if you want to reach a certain like level of creativity and you want to kind of get what's in your brain out into the DAW, I always say like the best thing to do is imagine what it's going to sound like first in your head and then aim towards that. So I don't ever do the kind of stuff you're talking about where you just like throw a bunch of things on and see what happens. I can't even remember.
I suppose the time you use trial and error is when there's days you just make wonky sounds.
Yeah, that's true. So like,
and that's when that would come into. You might find yourself throwing making comb filters there on that point.
Yeah,
but
that's
like
true.
I suppose when you're being creative in a musical sense and not a sound sense, like not a sonic sense, you're not gonna. Your brain's tapped into like. Traditionally, where would that go? Would I pre-chorus that, or is that going to be the start of my build-up? You know, there's those things to talk about more than crunchy like sound. I think.
Yeah, but yeah, like for example, yesterday I spent the whole day without a song in mind. It would just let me make a bunch of sounds.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I do is like I'll spend days upon end just making random bass hits and then bouncing them out as audio, saving them as presets. But I tend to use the audio more than anything because you can do so much more with the audio once it's there and printed.
You find yourself more so trying to create the songs that you hear in your head rather than just being like, hey, let's just, I don't know, let's just throw some crap on the wall, see what comes out, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yeah. I'm because I usually start with either a vocal or like a vibe in mind. I'll craft the sounds to sound like whatever it is I'm hearing in my head at that time.
I feel like if you were a 19-year-old in 2018, I feel that's more how your approach would be now.
Yeah, and there's people like, for example,
to say that all kids neglect songwriting, but
it's not neglect. It's just focusing on a different thing. Like, and there's people like Sudden Death. You know, I listen to his tunes and I'm just like, that guy is Sudden Death. Sudden Death. I listen to his tunes and I can tell that guy's not using anything that's in his head. He's just fiddling with stuff and different filters.
And then being like, oh!
Stumbled on something. I don't think there's any intention behind a lot of what he does. It doesn't sound like it. If there is even more like praise to that guy, but it feels like he just spends a really long time just messing with something that I don't do a whole lot. I tend to like know what it is in the synthesizer that I'm trying to get. And I'll try and get it out of it.
That's a really interesting perspective because I've actually never thought about that. I always thought that most of us, we can't portray what's in our head. So basically like doodle around until we like kind of forget what's in our head and then we make something else. But I've been neglecting that side of me. It's like when I hear things in my head to actually go and try and create that. That's it. You're saying that's where a huge part of the potential of production is then, right?
I feel anyway. Or just like learning and being able to learn to be like, I call it like being free creativity. Like if you're a free singer, it means that you can sing anything without your voice getting in the way. Or like if you're a free drummer, you can imagine the beat in your head and there's not even like a split second of thought. You just,
but that's the thing. It comes from saying it before playing it. And that's the thing about instrumentalists is from young, if you've actually gone through correct like teacher, like proper lessons, you will be working in like 8 and then 16, and when you're a bit older and more comfortable, then 32 bar patterns, to the point that you have to practice that and remember that, you know. So to then think about how the next 4 bars of your drop are going to sound like, it's not a lot to remember in your head when you're kind of like your whole brain piece is tuned into like keeping that 32 bar groove or that 16 bar pattern repeating and never changing. Yeah. So I think it's quite easy to like for a producer like Josh to be like, right, I need these 4 bars on lock, and you know, 10 minutes later you come back and he's on the 3rd set of 4 measures, and I'm like, okay, cool, we're on an outro of the drop now. He gets it done quick, and I guess that is from saying it and then and then it's like you won't hear from him for another 10 minutes, and then that's there on the screen sounding how he's just hummed it.
It's the idea that you initially had and you're making it come to life. And I feel like as like an aspiring producer, you can get caught up in the web of fiddling and just like aimlessly being experimental. Not that there's ever like an aimless way to be experimental. Experimental.
That's the idea of it, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the whole point of it. But I feel like for me anyway, the experimenting is mainly to get to grips with what does what, so that when I get in the studio and I'm like, I really want to make a tune that sounds exactly like this and has an element of this and this kind of finesse to it and this groove I've got in my mind with this kind of sound, I can just open up Serum and go, bang, I know that's going to work, I know this is going to work. And like, it takes me less time to just get the song down.
Do you do most of the production that you do, or the mixing, the mastering? Do you mostly do it in the studio, or do you do it on the go?
A combination of the two. So I've got a set of Audeze headphones and a sub pack for on the go. But to be honest with you, I've got to the point now where even blind mixing the spectral analyzer, I can kind of get it sounding kind of good without even hearing the music. It is just a visual representation. I know the techniques I use, and I know what frequencies I need to fill and what my overall spectral graph should look like. So I can kind of do a lot of that on the go without even having to hear. Like, the Audezes are some of the best headphones on the planet. Yes. But, you know, sub bass is hard to hear on any set of headphones if I don't have the sub pack. But I don't need to hear it as long as I can see the frequency spiking in the right place. In fact, I noticed you guys were talking to Al 5 about being able to key match easily using an EQ. I don't know if you know, but with a spectral analyzer in Ableton, when you move your mouse, in this bottom left corner here, it actually says the key.
Oh, look at that.
Uh-huh.
Ah, freaking
Modestep.
Modestep.
That was a game changer. Thank you, Culprit, again. If you play play the sub through it, and you wave your mouse over it, there you go. F, A, and the FabFilter plugin as well. You can, the FabFilter Q, whatever it is, 2, you can hit keyboard as well. At the bottom, there's like a little keyboard drop down, and then you can literally double click, and then it puts a notch directly wherever that key is represented on the frequency thing.
You mostly got this under control. So for the viewers that are watching, I guess this is more so going to be for you. And this is for you, you know, when you don't have your headphones, you got some really crappy headphones, you need to make them work at the, you know, it's crunch time, you got to make them work the way that they are, you know. There's this plugin, it's called Morphit. It's free. Well, technically it's 30 pounds, but you get the demo and it acts as the full one. You just can't save presets, which I don't know why you'd want to save presets anyways. So what it does, you put it on your master chain, you're like, hey, I have these headphones. And it's like, sweet, this is the EQ curve. And it flattens it out. So all of a sudden you can use like freaking Dre beats and have a flat response rate. And it's freaking insane, man.
That's weird, and I don't believe that it works 100%, but like...
Yeah, because those Dre beats are literally only bass drivers.
Well, you're talking about a few things here, right? So just to get geeky with it, you're talking about an ADDA conversion, which has to be good to begin with. Then you're talking about the quality of the headphone and the driver that it can reproduce, and the speed at which it can reproduce it, which no plugin is going to be able to change that. So it's probably going to be like just an EQ change, but... Has it got like every pair of headphones in there? It
doesn't have every pair, but it has a crap ton. All of the Bare Dynamics, all of the Audio Technica. Anyways,
probably like Shure and
yeah, it has a lot. Like I actually think that Apple headphones are in there. Actually.
Yeah, I mean we've been to some really big mastering houses, and they will have a set just there, and they'll pop them in.
Gentlemen, this has been absolutely freaking amazing. I know I'm the only one here, but on behalf of the entire In the DAW team and the entire producer community, thank you so freaking much for doing this. Did you guys have a good time?
Had a great time, dude. I wish I could like show a bit more. This tune, unfortunately, is just like, it was so to the point, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. There's nothing like particularly experimental or techniques that I could show you guys that are really going to change anything. This tune specifically is just like very, very simple technical wise, but I guess it doesn't sound that simple, right? It's kind of the tune has its
it has a complexity in simplicity.
Are you guys doing a tour? Do you have any products you want to push or anything like that?
Follow a Suicide Club on Instagram.
Oh yeah, we're starting a clothing label called a Suicide Club, and a small percentage of the profits goes towards like mental health awareness. Go have a look on Instagram, a Suicide Club. And we've got another song coming out February the 19th.
What? That got changed.
It did get changed, that's right, yeah. So February the 19th, we have a new tune coming out. It's a collab with Dion Timmer. And it's called Going Nowhere. So yeah, look out for that. That's coming. And we have another tune coming out in April. So just check all of our socials out. We're going to be as active as ever. We've got a US tour and Canada tour coming up.
Who would you guys like to see come on In the DAW?
Oh yeah, okay, Sudden Death, definitely. Spag
Cartel.
Boombox Cartel, Spaghetti. There's some people that like, I don't know how to say their names, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by that. Guys, name yourself things that people can say. Hula Style, is that how you say it? You know, Abstract would be a good one.
I want to see what he does with these synths.
Rootkid, yeah. Cohen Sound, if you could get Cohen Sound on that, there's still done things in the past that I don't think anyone has been able to do since. Flavor D.
Champion T.
Dion. I'd like to see what Dion does. Zomboy as well. Like, share the knowledge, share the love. If you know how to do stuff that other people don't know. Back in the day when people played instruments, it was like their pleasure to sit down with someone else who played an instrument and show them stuff that they didn't know and swap information. But I've met so many producers who, if you start talking about production, they just turn around and just kind of go a bit like you're trying to get a secret from them, you know? Yeah. It shouldn't be like that. So any new producers going out there, keep that in your head.
It is always like that on the cusp of sonic revolution, though, because if someone feels like
they've got a key.
And I can understand why.
Another guy for your list, I guess Virtual Riot, throw him on your list. I'm sure he
barely alive, why not? Wookie!
Dude, you guys gave me one heck of a to-do list, but I'm stoked. This is friggin' amazing. I got a lot of editing to do on this video, but I am stoked. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Nice one, bruv.
Thank you for having us, Wyatt, man.